There's new momentum to try to find a solution to the refugee crisis across Europe. The EU President Donald Tusk is visiting Greece and Turkey, two countries that have been inundated with people escaping conflict in Syria and beyond. Tusk's visit comes as thousands of refugees remain stuck in limbo on the border between Macedonia and Greece. The UN says the build-up of migrants is fast becoming a humanitarian disaster, with shortages of food, water and supplies. Macedonia briefly opened its border on Wednesday, allowing a few hundred people into the country, but it has since remained shut. Let's speak to our correspondent TRT World's Alican Ayanla. He's in the Greek village of Idomeni, which is near the Macedonian border. Alican, what are conditions like where you are?
Well, Malene, when you have 10,000 stranded refugees in an area that was originally built to serve the temporary needs of a tenth of that or an eighth of that, clearly the conditions are going to be desperate. I want to show you some pictures, Malene. To my right-hand side, there's a field here, and you can see an ocean of tents, and these belong to the thousands of refugees who are unable to get inside of the Idomeni refugee camp because that camp is at overcapacity. And because they have to sleep out in the field, in their tents, they're exposed to the bitter cold conditions. If we pan towards the right over here, we're also going to see a queue of people. And this is a very common scene. Every day we're seeing hundreds of people line up at 8:30 in the morning. And this line, you can see, stretches for hundreds of meters. And they wait for hours just to get their first meal of the day, which basically consists of a boiled egg and a very basic sandwich. But I also want to show you something very important, Marlene. Here on the ground, if our cameraman can actually tilt down, I'm going to show you there's a pile of stones here. And this is supposed to be a grave, a symbolic grave of a child. And there are some flowers and some branches laid on top of the stones. There's also a cardboard box, and there's a message written on it, and it reads, "Our babies did not die in Iraq and Syria. They died here in the cold." Clearly, a message of frustration over the conditions that some 10,000 refugees have to endure, frustration over the fact that only a handful of people are being allowed through from Idomeni in Greece into Gevgelia in Macedonia.
Okay, Alican, things clearly incredibly tough for people where you are. Alican Ayanla joining us there live from Idomeni. Well, as we were mentioning, the EU President Donald Tusk is trying to come up with a solution to this crisis. His first stop today is Greece. We can speak to our correspondent Natalie Savirakas, who joins us live from Athens. You had a chance to listen to our correspondent Alican there. Things are tough. Greece has complained about the huge pressure it is under in trying to cope with these refugees. What will authorities be wanting to hear from the EU, from Donald Tusk?
Well, I think what the authorities here want to hear is that the EU is prepared to act. That is essentially what Alexis Tsipras, the Greek Prime Minister, has been calling on for months now, a more coordinated response to this huge migration and refugee crisis, one that the EU hasn't managed to address in a coordinated way. And that's essentially what Donald Tusk is here to do, to listen again to Alexis Tsipras, and as he tweeted earlier, to try and find a response to this migration crisis with the EU. But of course, he will also be traveling to Turkey this afternoon after meeting with Alexis Tsipras to discuss with authorities there on how to find a coordinated response, not only on the EU side, but also with Turkey. And I think essentially that is what the Greek Prime Minister is also hoping for, a way to work with Turkey as well, to kind of like stem the flow, this massive flow of refugees and migrants that continue to arrive on the Greek shores. For example, this morning, another several thousand refugees and migrants have made it to Piraeus from the Greek islands. And that, I think, is essentially what the Greek authorities are looking for, especially as yesterday the Migration Minister himself, Mr. Mouzalas, said that as far as Idomeni is concerned, he will have to treat the situation as if the borders will be shut for the coming years. And this is a crisis that is here to stay.
Okay, Natalie, good to get that update from you. Natalie Savirakas joining us there from Athens. Well, as Natalie was saying, Mr. Tusk's next stop is Ankara, where he will meet Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu this afternoon. Our correspondent Natasha Exelby joins us live now from the Turkish capital. Turkey, of course, key to the EU when it comes to stemming that flow of refugees into Europe. But some EU countries have been saying Turkey isn't doing enough. So what kind of response are we expecting from Ankara today?
Well, Marlene, the fact that Turkey has taken in 2.7 million refugees, which far surpasses the figure of anywhere else in the world, the fact that the EU is saying that Turkey is not doing enough, I don't think is a statement that is being warmly welcomed by the Turkish government. Having said that, the EU is still wanting to stem the flow of refugees coming from Turkey and going on to Europe, and that's likely to be the centre of the discussions today between Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu and the European Council President Donald Tusk. What the EU is asking is that Turkey decreases the number of refugees passing through Turkey onto Europe to 1,000 people per day. Now, to give you an idea of how big of an ask that is, last year on average 7,000 people were passing through Turkey every day. That figure has decreased to 2,000 people per day since the beginning of this year in the last 2 months. But of course, that's also coincided with winter. And now that spring is here, the weather is warming up. Those numbers are likely to increase. So asking 1,000 people per day, that's a very big ask from the EU to Turkey. So it'll be interesting to see how the Turkish government responds to that. The EU is offering Turkey, though, that if it does comply with those rules and manages to stem the flow of people, it will take 100,000 Syrian refugees who are currently in Turkish refugee camps, and they will be redispersed through Europe.
Okay, Natasha, good to speak to you. Natasha Exelby speaking to us from the Turkish capital there.